Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome everybody to the policy seminar, School Meals in the 21st Century, Emerging Evidence and Future Directions. Problems abound today, but we also have many solutions. And school meals is one of the solutions that works for 400 million school children every day, and probably cumulative billions that benefit from school meal programs over the years. Many countries in the world have school meal programs. So the challenge is really not whether to have school meal programs or not, but how do we make these programs work better at scale? What we have to, very excited by the seminar today, we have a fantastic lineup that will talk about new studies, presenting new evidence on the benefits of school meal programs, and then a panel that will talk about how to turn evidence into action. So without further ado, let me turn the floor over to Purnima Menon, Senior Director here at IFPRI. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Aulo, and thank you, everyone else. It's really wonderful to see so many of you here. Also want to welcome Dawn, who's joining us online. So education and nutrition are absolutely foundational to human capital development globally, especially in settings where the goals of human capital development are yet to be met for millions and millions of children. Over the years, school meal programs were originally set up in a way that recognized the crucial links between food security, poverty, and education, and were widely implemented with those goals in mind, with nutrition coming along with those. Now, of course, we live in a world today where we recognize that the linkages between school meal programs and the broader global agendas of food systems transformation are really quite important to consider. Those linkages are already wide-ranging. They've been in place for a while. School meal programs have tapped into agricultural programs in countries. Subsidized commodities in agriculture have found their place in school meal programs. We are rethinking today how food enters these programs and links back into agricultural value chains. And there's also a lot of thinking about how to make school meal programs work even better for nutrition itself in terms of integration of nutrition education and other things. Now, the way that we're thinking about school meal programs today, which is quite different from maybe how we thought about it 20 years ago, actually offers us a framework, a new framework to look at these programs in a broader and much more holistic way. At the same time, I think, those of us who are really leaning into this with an evidence-based perspective in mind recognize that we may not today have evidence on all of the different ways in which school meal programs can deliver the kinds of multiple outcomes that we are concerned about here. And so I'm really thrilled that, over the years, of course, we and many of you in the room today have been proud to be part of this community of researchers that has sort of stuck together, leaned in on building evidence on the impacts of school meal programs for a wide range of development goals, on education, certainly, and also on nutrition. And I think we stand poised today to say, what more do we need to learn? What more do we need to know that really helps us take this thinking forward on how to fulfill what I think many are seeing as a very substantial impact of school meal programs on a very, very wide range of development outcomes. So I want to thank Aulo, the Rockefeller Foundation team that is engaging with us on this, Don Bundy and the School Meals Research Consortium, and really all of you, and including the large community that's anchored by the Global Child Nutrition Forum that's been looking at school meal programs, for the collaboration and the partnership around this effort of looking at what the evidence is saying, thinking about the world that we want to see looking forward, and thinking really about how we can put together all of the dots that are necessary to bring together on that pathway from evidence to action in this sort of new, very holistic way of looking at school meal programs in a changing world. So, without further ado, I'm as interested in the rest of the policy seminar as all of you are. I want to hand over to Dawn, welcoming you, Dawn, to IFPRI, and asking for your opening remarks as well, and then back to Aulo. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much indeed, Purnima. I should tell you that I'm getting a great back echo from this, but I think that's now stopped. Okay. Absolutely. This is the World Bank recognizes school meals as the world's most extensive safety nets. And we're just waiting for the new data, but we know that at least 420 million children are fed daily through nationally organized programs. Yet also from a research point, and Purnima made this point well, I think, from a research point, school children and young adolescents are amongst the most neglected age groups in terms of health and nutrition research. IFPRI continues to be a center of excellence in this area, and we are delighted to join with them. And when I say we, I'm talking about the School Meals Coalition that was established now amongst 108 countries, including the United States, 108 countries working to improve the delivery and the efficiency of school meals programs and to expand their reach. And I'm delighted that IFPRI and the research consortium for that School Meals Coalition are now working together to explore this area. This seminar is a reflection of that, and also the seminar is followed by 3 days of workshops to identify priorities going forward as we work in this area. So with that, I'm looking forward to the very interesting discourse today, and I hand back to Aulo. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Purnima. Thank you very much, Dawn, for setting the scene for a very exciting next hour. So without further ado, let me call to the podium Dr. Alderman, Senior Research Fellow Emeritus here at IFPRI, to give us a lay of the land in terms of what we know and what we still need to know about school meals.
Thank you. I'm not going to try to say what we know. The body of people here they know what we're learning. But I want to put things in context. Got two sets of statistics which I hopefully would put things in context. First, in the turn of the century, 82% of primary age children in Africa actually attended primary. In 2019, that was 98%. In Asia, at the turn of the century, it was 90% attending school. Now it's 99% attending primary school. Things have changed, and you can't get to that figure without partially closing any gender gaps. You can't get to 99 with one gender. That's one change already. That whatever excellent research was around 20 years ago, it doesn't address some of the issues we want to know about school feeding and education. A second set of statistics, which is I find very interesting, coming from Arlene and her colleagues. If you are in an upper income country in a primary school, 69% of the children will receive school meals. If you're in a lower income country, that's 18%. If you're in a low middle income country, it's 39%. That shows, of course, a gap, an important gap to still consider, but it also shows that there's a interest in school meals that is not just, it is also about poverty reduction, but it's not just about poverty reduction. So just, again, I'm not trying to give evidence. We have a couple of days for that. Just want to give 4 areas that school meals work on and some of the context. First of all, there's education. But as we know, it's not getting kids to school, it's getting kids to learn. And we know more about getting kids to school than what is the learning conditional on being in school. It partly has to do with attendance, it has to do with attention, it has to do with fitting into the school curriculum. That's one area. Then, of course, there's nutrition. I was fortunate to be at the annual meeting of the South African Nutrition Association the day that Mandela announced the school breakfast program. It was the biggest initiative to date at the time. Nobody was in the halls going, high five, hey, look what we got. There was actually a poll. They were not happy because they considered school meals to be in competition with the target group of under 2. Now we're looking at school meals in a different context. It is part of addressing the double burden you have to bring in schools. Particularly, you have to bring them in for a different age group than just primary. I would say for the preschoolers as well as the adolescents. So that's already a changing context of where school meals fit in nutrition. Then there's the issue of social protection, because although school meals' role of nutrition is one way of looking at it, their role in addressing hunger is a slightly different issue. Hunger is not the same, well, everybody here knows, not the same as nutrition. But it is part of social protection. It is part of poverty reduction. And school meal programs have been flexible to respond to crises, to respond to programs of social protection that probably is not reflected in that 19% of low-income households receiving school meals regularly. But if you looked at what happened in COVID, and when you look what happens in crises, social protection has a role in crisis response. Then there is finally a growing area of interest, which is the contribution to agriculture. And that has been something that African countries in general have made it a major policy, but it's not just Africa, on what do school meals do for agriculture. And I would argue there we have less evidence, and we'll go over that in the next couple of days, on how much what it affects school menus you can see very easily. And it brings in diversity, that's not a question. How it affects farmers cannot be shown merely by what the schools purchase, because you have to figure out how the farmers shift their agriculture, how much you need to increase their yields or their profitability through joint ventures with agriculture extension. It's an area which is much harder to do than just looking at the school itself, so that the evidence base, although it's beginning to come in, the evidence base is still a frontier for us to be discussing. Now, over the next couple of days, we're going to see that the evidence base is actually growing, and I look forward to participating. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Harold, for the whirlwind review of these priorities. So we're now going to turn on to actually presenting new evidence from some very exciting and well-designed studies. And we're going to start off with Simone Lombardini, who's joining us from WFP, and he's going to present to us impact evaluation in Jordan. Over to you, Simone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aulo, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Today, what I will be doing is presenting some of the main results coming from an impact evaluation that the World Food Programme Auspicious Evaluation has conducted in partnership with colleagues from the World Bank DIME, as well as colleagues from the WFP country office, the Jordanian government, particularly from the Ministry of Education, and implementing partners. Before diving into the impact evaluation, let me phrase and present this study within the broader context of WFP's impact evaluation windows. These are portfolios of impact evaluations conducted on thematic priority areas for WFP. At the moment, we have 3 ongoing impact evaluation windows, one on cash-based transfer and gender, another on climate and resilience, and then, of course, these on school-based programs. The school-based program impact evaluation window is trying to generate evidence around 3 main thematic areas. The first one is trying to assess the impact of school meals on children's education and nutritional outcomes. The second one is trying to generate evidence on employment and agricultural production and local economies more broadly. And the third area is trying to compare different delivery modalities and see how these affect program quality. At the moment, we have 6 ongoing impact evaluations in different countries, and 2 recently concluded, one in Jordan that I will be presenting now, and another on Gambia that my colleague Benedetta will be presenting later, as well as 2 other pilots that we just recently concluded in Guatemala and Burundi. So diving into the impact evaluation in Jordan. So Jordan has a national school feeding program that is led and managed by the government, which consists in delivering centrally procured date bars to over 400,000 students. Back in 2021, the Jordanian government has asked the WFP country office to pilot an alternative program with the aim to increase children's nutritional diversity by providing healthier meals, which consist in what you can see in this picture, which includes fruits and vegetables, as well as a pastry filled with cheese. And also, in doing it so, by foster socioeconomic development, by creating jobs, particularly for women that are employed in local kitchens to procure and package these products. And within this context, the WFP country office has asked us to set up an impact evaluation that would have been looking at first and the impact on moving from one model to the other on children's nutritional and learning outcomes, and then looking at the impact on socioeconomic outcomes in creating these job opportunities. I will be focusing on this second aspect, but please consider there is also the evaluation also consider the other component. And for the second component, we've been using a randomized control trial. We knew that the program needed approximately 250 workers to be employed in different kitchens in poverty pocket areas in the country. However, there were significantly more women who expressed the desire to participate and would have been eligible to participate. So what we did in partnership with the colleagues from the country office and implementing partners was to randomly select women that received the job offer to participate into the program. What we did observe after 1 year of the implementation is that not all the women that received the job offer by the end of the year were still employed at the end of the year. 70% of them did, and the remaining 30, they either stopped working or refused the offer for a number of reasons. As well as we see that approximately 15% of women who did not receive the job offer ended up employed in other sectors. However, more interestingly, what we see is that women that did receive the job offer are more likely to want to remain in the labor force in the future compared to those that did not receive the job offer. We also do observe an increase in individual income that more than triple, as well as an overall household income that increased by a third. And this increase in household income is then translating into a higher level of savings, as well as higher level of non-food expenditures. We did also collect a number of indicators around life satisfaction, and we do observe a small but statistically significant increase in life satisfaction among the workers that did receive the job offer. And we did also collect information from male household members, and what we do observe is that male household members report less restrictive attitudes towards women earning more than their husband within those households that did receive the job offer. Again, these are just some of the main results that we presented in the part that is looking at the local economy. There are more that are concerning children. Please do and download the report, the briefs, and of course reach out if there is any question. But yeah, this is all. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Simone, and really, and well done for pulling off really this excellent study, which is really the first study that rigorously looked at sort of trying to value and get a sense of the effectiveness of school meals in providing benefits in the service delivery and employment, something that we know is there, but tangibly and empirically we've found very difficult to do. So really, congratulations. What we're going to do now is we've asked Dr. Benedetta Lerva from the World Bank to present a study in the Gambia. And here we're going to look more at the traditional outcomes at the child level, and with a particular focus on learning. Benedetta, please. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Let's see if you can hear me. So as Simone mentioned, part of the same collaboration related to Jordan that on the results that you just saw also produced this wonderful work that I'm happy to present to you on evidence from the Gambia and the homegrown school feeding program there. So the study in the Gambia was, here you see a map of the Gambia. The Gambia is a country in West Africa. It took place in 2023, so in the first sort of 6-7 months of 2023. And the study locations, as you see here, are mainly in region 3 and in region 6. So what happened is we worked with 92 schools with the objective, in 92 primary schools in the Gambia, with the objective to understand how the school feeding program affected children's outcomes, and also pilot teacher interventions to see what can be done to potentially boost teacher attendance. And so by combining, we designed an RCT that combines high-frequency child surveys with a wealth of digitized school data. We wanted to investigate. Investigate the objectives by comparing 4 groups in which schools were randomly assigned to. So among schools that were eligible according to the country office, the World Food Programme's country office in the Gambia, to receive the school feeding program, some of them were randomized into receiving school meals, some of them were randomized into receiving teacher incentives only, that's 10% of a teacher's monthly salary provided to teachers if they carry out a task that requires them to be present at school. Another group receiving both school feeding and teacher incentives, and a comparison group that did not receive either of the interventions. I'll talk you through, as Aulo mentioned, the impacts at the child level, and I'll mainly focus on a few that we believe would be interesting and innovative for you to hear about. Let me see. Maybe I'll use the clicker. Ooh.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, I'll use this then.
Sorry.
Let's see how, okay, here we go. So first, what you see here on the left is impacts on food security and dietary diversity of children. So the dark blue bars indicate the outcomes of children who were receiving school feeding, or in schools who were receiving school feeding, compared to the light blue bars that are the comparison group in that in this graph. And you can see that food security increased among children, so from 73% to 82% of the children report being food secure, and dietary diversity also increased among children. And this is very interesting because the meal the children were provided was a meal cooked with local ingredients. And so the menu included 9 different local meals the children would have would know it was not foreign food to them. What's striking also about these results is that the program, even though it was not, the objective was not specifically on girls, it ended up being a very pro-girl program. And this is what you can see in the pink bars here. So the impacts both on food security and on dietary diversity on girls are much higher than on boys. Of course, they are large on boys as well, but for girls, they're just a little bit larger. For food security, because girls just have larger food security after receiving the school feeding program, starting from similar levels as boys, and instead for dietary diversity, because girls had lower dietary diversity to begin with, and so they basically catch up with the boys. Let's now move to an outcome that is dear to us because it's something that is usually not studied and connected to school feeding, but it's important. They can explain important mechanisms of on the program impacts. And that's mental well-being. So we took measuring mental well-being very seriously, and we adopted sort of clinical indicators to measure children's mental well-being. Specifically here, you see stress and depression. And so what you see is that for children receiving school feeding, so once again, the dark blue bars to the left, the share of children reporting moderate and severe depression goes down as much as stress. The decrease is it's 20% in the number of children reporting high stress, medium to high stress, and as we saw, so mirroring the impacts that we saw on food security and dietary diversity, the program is pro-girls in this way as well, also for its impacts on mental health, where girls are further even more likely to have lower stress levels and lower depression levels than at the beginning of the program. And the decrease in stress for girls only, it's about 25%. Now you may be wondering, okay, so you've shown us about, like sort of like the food security, dietary diversity. You told us about mental health. So what happens with the teachers now, the other side sort of the intervention? I mentioned earlier, the teacher intervention was the provision of a 10% sort of top up on a teacher's monthly salary if teachers were present in school, were carrying out some tasks that require their presence in school. So the program was effective in increasing teacher attendance. So you see from baseline where teachers were there 74% of the time, now you have the teachers are there 84% of the time. This is a large jump. It's a 10 percentage point increase is definitely in line with literature on teacher incentives and a bit more. And we looked even on the teacher side, we sort of applied a magnifying lens with the gender point of view. And what we noticed is that while overall the program increased teacher presence among men and women teachers, the increase was larger for women teachers. So you see that women teachers have a lower starting attendance rate. And as a result of the program, they are there 86% of the time. In the time that I have left, let me just walk you through two education-related impacts for the children. The first one is, as mentioned, attendance is a first-order concern, and one of the attendance in primary school is one of the success stories of recent sort of like development efforts. And one interesting feature of this program is that it did increase attendance, but it was particularly beneficial for children who would have not gone to school that much otherwise. So what this graph is showing you, it's the percentile of attendance of children is at the bottom. And what you see, that spike that you see in the graph shows that impacts are larger for children that would not be attending very much, and impacts are lower for children who would be attending anyway. And these impacts are very similar for teacher incentive and for the school feeding component of the program. So both increase attendance, particularly for vulnerable children. And now, closing in the time that I have left, something on learning. Impacts on learning are nuanced, and we would love to discuss them more with you, as there is much to be said on this front, to be honest. So the measurement approach that we took here is both wanting to show you the impacts of the program on the early grade reading assessment. That's what you see to the left, is a standardized worldwide test of literacy for children of that age. And there, we don't see much. Both school feeding and teacher incentives do not necessarily really improve overall literacy. But then we looked specifically at some tasks, and what we could notice is that this most simple reading tasks, in that case, when we look at the most simple reading tasks, we see that combining school feeding and teacher incentive increases substantially, and that's the dark blue bar to my right, their children's ability to read simple words. So there is something to be said there about the combination of the two programs, really increasing the ability to read, but only, simple words, showing that we need to think a little bit more also about how to improve literacy as a result of these efforts. And I think that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Benedetta. Really, congratulations for a great study. And really interesting that you've sort of started to look at the mental health side. And that's an area that's been overlooked. But it's an area where in the next presentation that Dr. Lilia Bliznashka will present is particularly salient in the context of humanitarian crises. So it's something that maybe school feeding programs can be more purposefully trying to improve. So without further ado, Lily, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Aulo. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today and for this opportunity to share findings from our impact evaluation in Yemen on improving the school feeding program. I'll start with a little bit of background. So globally, about 2 billion children live in a conflict-affected area. And we know conflict can have both short and long-term effects directly through increasing mortality, morbidity, and malnutrition, and indirectly through the effects on health and food systems, markets, and institutions. And school feeding, we know, can support children's nutrition, health, and education, even in non-conflict settings. But in conflict, it provides additional safety, a sense of normalcy, and it can protect against different risks and disruptions. But evidence on the effectiveness of school meals in conflict and humanitarian settings is limited. So this study took place in Yemen, where about half the population is food insecure, and malnutrition is prevalent in school-aged children, both under and overnutrition. The school meals are provided by WFP, who supply date bars or high-energy biscuits, and in 2022, they reached just under 20% of school children. In 2023, our team at IFPRI conducted extensive formative research to see how to improve the school meals program in Yemen, and we found that both the date bars and the energy biscuits are really cost efficient in terms of delivering the nutrients, but the children don't really like them. So the biscuits are hard, they're difficult to swallow, they don't finish them, they want juice or milk or chocolate. But long-term, all the stakeholders we interviewed wanted to see hot meals cooked at school daily with locally sourced ingredients. So getting from these biscuits to this long-term vision required the exploration of some hybrid scenarios that allow us to improve the quality of the meal at a more incremental cost while we shift towards healthier diets and healthier meals at school. And so what we did in the study is test this type of small improvement by adding a daily drink of milk to the existing high-energy biscuit program and looking at the effectiveness on different outcomes. We conducted a cluster randomized trial in 42 schools in the Al Mocha district in the south of Yemen. Half the schools were randomized to the control group, which received the biscuits you can see on the left, so that's business as usual. And half the schools were randomized to the milk group, which received the biscuits and a daily drink of milk. So we hypothesized that the addition of milk, the improvement of the school meals, can work through biological pathways. So we're providing more nutrients and increasing nutrient intake, but we're also improving the consumption of the biscuits, which we know is suboptimal. There are also numerous behavioral pathways through which the milk can improve different outcomes. So kind of providing a brief overview, improving the school meal can help support household income, children's diet, and attendance, which support household food security, caregiver and children's outcomes, and ultimately can support child learning, which is the overall objective of this particular school meals program. And we explore all of these behavioral pathways in our study. We enrolled primary school-age children and their caregivers in the study, and we conducted the baseline in December, January of last year, and the end line in April, May of last year. And we conduct intention to treat analysis with linear mixed effects models. So shifting to the results, you can see here an example of some of the schools in our sample. We had just under 1,300 children in our sample. There were about 9 years of age at baseline, half were boys and half were girls. So in terms of results on this table, you can see the different levels, dimensions, and indicators. And in the last column, you can see the direction and magnitude of the effect comparing the milk to the control group. So in terms of household and caregiver outcomes, we found reductions in severe and moderate food insecurity and a small improvement in caregiver severe anxiety disorder. With respect to children, we found a variety of impacts. So not surprisingly, we found an increase in milk consumption. We found a reduction in a number of morbidity symptoms, for example, reduced experiences of cough. We also found a reduction in conduct problems, so that's an aspect of mental health as well. And we found large improvements in cognition, in literacy, and numeracy scores. We found no differences in dietary diversity or nutritional status or school attendance. And so going back to this, to the pathways through which the intervention worked, you can see here highlighted in green the differences that we observed in the study. So improving the school meal, so the food in school, did not change child diet or school attendance, but it did improve household food security, caregiver mental health, children's morbidity and psychosocial outcomes, and likely led to these large improvements we see in child literacy and numeracy. And notably, we did find consistently large effects among girls than boys for learning and for a number of other outcomes. So bringing it all together, the study shows rigorous evidence that even over short term, an improvement of the school meal can have really important benefits for children and their families. So the results are consistent with the few other studies in conflict-affected settings, but we do have these really exciting results on mental health, similar to the previous presentation, both for the caregivers and for the children. And when we think about the duration of the study, which is about 5 months, and the context in Yemen, the results are really remarkable in terms of magnitude and diversity. And they really highlight how we can leverage school feeding and small improvements in the meals during humanitarian and conflict settings. So we have an RCT, we have a number of different objective and subjective indicators, but it was a pilot in a single district. So we need to be careful when interpreting the results, as they might not generalize. But they largely suggest that these hybrid models they're acceptable, they're feasible, and they lead to meaningful changes for the most vulnerable populations. So what's next in terms of programming and research is to really look at the costs, the medium and long-term benefits over a full school year or beyond, of localizing the supply chain, and really the opportunities for scaling up these effective interventions. And before I hand it back to Aulo, I'd like to acknowledge the rest of the team here at IFPRI, our implementation partners at WFP and HSA, and our funders. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for the great presentation, Lily. And really interesting to see, in some ways, that consistently, whenever we look at these effects, we see very strong effects in girls. And it's going to be interesting to understand how the mechanisms of why these programs are particularly effective in these different contexts. And also bear in mind, we've seen some fantastic presentations about effectiveness, but none of the presentations presented cost data, right? So cost is one of the key gaps, and the data we have on costs is critical for scale up, right? And the literature really is 20 years old, or close to 20 years old. So that's an important area going forward. And it's an area that we'll talk about right now. So we've put together a panel whose job it is to reflect on these excellent presentations and really consider how do we turn this evidence into action. So we've got a fairly multidisciplinary panel who we'll invite to sit at the front, and they each have 5 minutes to reflect on these important insights. First on the panel, we have Dr. Mangani Katundu, who wears 2 hats. He is the secretary in the Ministry of Education of the government of Malawi, but he's also a professor at the University of Malawi, with whom we've been working for a decade, really, to generate evidence of programs. And his job is now to turn this evidence into action. So he's perfectly placed to reflect on this. Mangani. You can sit here with the microphone, or you can go on the panel. You prefer. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, really, to you just turn off my talking notes. No, thank you very much for this opportunity to reflect on the amazing work that's being done in different parts of the countries, of the globe, and also to look at some of the issues. I'm going to talk about the other issues that I think there wasn't a lot of emphasis on, and use the Malawi example. In Malawi, we started off with about 20% school feeding, and now we've scaled up to about 40%, with the desire to scale it up to 100% by 2030. Well, on reflection, when you talk about that kind of scaling up, you forget that between now, within the 5 years, there is a large group of children that are not going to benefit from this. And when we were reflecting with our minister, we're saying probably 2030 is too far. Can we look at different ways of exploring how this could be done? Well, school feeding in Malawi started as a kindergarten issue. We used to call it a milk school yankaka in our language, because children were being given milk when they go to the preschool. But you realize that as children come to school, they come on an empty stomach, they are yawning, they are not concentrating, and so the learning and the reading and numeracy issue come to play. So we started having school feeding, mainly starting with porridge. So currently there's been porridge that is given. Now, you cook porridge and provide. WFP has come in, and there is the issue of homegrown school feeding, which is looking more on seasonality, availability of different foodstuffs, and probably not just looking at porridge as provision. But energy comes in. How do you cook? How do you provide food? Well, in the model that we have seen, the women were employed to provide this. In Malawi, it's done for free. So parents have to commit to be available to prepare food for their children. And because of that, we started thinking of a scale-up that involves everyone. And we are having an initiative that is called Let's Feed Them So That They Can Be Educated. So the contributions, because the budget from the government is small. And as global events change, as we have seen in the past few weeks, you find that sometimes funding for school feeding may not be as reliable. And you may be thinking there will be a scale up. And we're saying, can communities take part in this provision of food? Churches probably need to come in and contribute. But then there comes the issue of preparation. Where would the firewood for cooking the porridge and the food come from? So we have started thinking of biogas as a means, and there are different means. You can use the toilets that the kids are having, and we have seen schools who are producing biogas from human waste, and that biogas gets used, but you can also use animal waste. And we are trying to pilot with care to see if farmers that have got animals for dairy, or which could be also provided to schools to produce biogas. So we need to start reflecting on, can communities contribute? It costs about 40,000 Malawi kwacha, which is about $20 a year to feed a child. Can this come from the communities in terms of both contribution of food itself, as well as contribution of resources by the community, but also with the climate change issue, looking at the energy, how are we going to bring in the issue of the energy? Finally, will communities continue to be available to provide the food? Now that goes to the issue of motivation. Can we share the evidence more with communities, with parents, with society, so that they can see school feeding as an important initiative that helps them to educate them, to feed them so that they can be educated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mangani. Thanks for your insights and really highlighting some of the trade-offs that we need to think about as programs look to scale and the quality of the program's service delivery. Yeah, optimally, we'd love to have these fantastic meals, but how do we manage scale and costs and quality? So without further ado, let me pass the floor to Professor Don Bundy, who's has been working on these issues for lots of time, and he's also now director of the School Health and Nutrition Research Consortium at the London School. Over to you, Don. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Aulo. Thank you for the ageist introduction. I really appreciate that one. That was a joke, by the way. It's often hard to project down a live feed like this. What I want to talk about is the context of research, what research is needed, and how can we make this happen. And I just want to say, let's have the first slide. I want to say that Linda Schultz is with you today, and she's also going to be part of the discussion over the next 3 days with the workshop. Could I have the next slide, please? What I want to talk about, so Linda is part of our team in the School Meals Coalition Research Consortium. So what's the School Meals Coalition? This was created in October 2021, now has 108 countries, member states, and 140 partners. And this arose from the COVID pandemic. Many of you will be aware that the 2008 food, fuel, and financial crisis resulted in the recognition of the importance of school meals and a decade of growth in school meals, which was stopped by the COVID pandemic and then has received a remarkable increase in momentum as a result of this coalition. And I just want to say that the coalition, as you can see, 108 countries across the world. It has a group of 3 co-chairs, President Lula from Brazil, President Macron from France, and Minister Villetavio from Finland. And it has a very specific task force, a group of countries and the African Union. The countries are listed here, a group of countries that work, if you like, as an executive committee for driving forward the work of the School Meals Coalition. And one of the first things that the School Meals Coalition did, if I could have the next slide, please, is launch an initiative called the Research Consortium for School Health and Nutrition, with a specific mission of generating evidence and curating evidence and providing policymakers with policy and programmatic guidance. And it's this research consortium that is the key that I'm going to talk about in terms of trying to bring our research together. The consortium has a secretariat with, the coalition has a secretariat with the World Food Programme. So here on this slide, we see all these maps representing the 108 countries. These are the countries that decide on the way forward. The consortium, therefore, these countries are the bosses, and the consortium has a secretariat at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, but its work is actually global. And it managed through this series of 7 communities of practice, running from analytics and metrics through to our latest community in Brazil, which is focusing on artificial intelligence. But one of the key things that's come out of this group of communities of practice is the realization of the creation of an academy, a global think tank, if you like, which has now got more than 1,000 professors, scholars, and practitioners in the area of school meals specifically, and representing more than 100 countries. It's this group, waves our thinking forward, and we hope you will wish to join that. If you go to the next slide, please. What we discover when we're looking at the meals is, well, to reiterate, the World Bank has made that the most extensive social safety net worldwide. They're in nearly all countries do school feeding to some extent, and that at the moment we're finding around 418 million children. This is coming from the State of School Feeding 2020. The 2022. They're just about to publish data, I think, next year, showing that this is something like a half of the world's primary school children receiving meals at school. So this is an extraordinarily large number. But what's particularly extraordinary is that it's nearly all paid for by the countries themselves. And this pie chart is deliberately made, if you like, a slight joke. But the thin line is the international support for schools. The rest of it is domestic funds. So 98% of the $48 billion that's part of this industry of school meals worldwide actually comes from domestic funds. And I want to emphasize that we're seeing that the countries that are doing this, countries are supporting this because they see this as a worthwhile investment. I sort of use a stark example of Ukraine. Ukraine launched a national school meals program just last year in a time of war, and saw this as their investment in the future of their children. And it's that kind of thinking, seeing this as a development investment long term, that is a key part of how we now understand governments view these programs. And at the next slide, I want to emphasize this concept of investment. And we've been supporting value for money studies in some 20 countries now, and finding that the returns on investment are of the order of $7 to $35 per dollar invested, but that these returns aren't coming to any one individual sector. These are multi-sectoral returns. These are additive returns over a group of sectors. And I just give you some idea of this. So let's take education. The world invests, the low and middle income world invests $2.8 trillion in primary and secondary education every year. And that this then is leveraged by the well-being of the children. If the children don't experience well-being, they don't learn. This was the theme, or a theme, of the UNESCO Global Education meeting held in Fortaleza at the end of last year, the main meeting for UNESCO, for the first time, giving focus to this issue that looking after the health and well-being of children was crucial for leveraging those education dollars. What is health spending on that? Well, health is spending about 2% of that amount, of the 2.8 trillion, on well-being in this age group. So that's really a question. That's really an issue. But what we do know is that health benefits from those programs, that establishing good early dietary preferences impacts obesity, diabetes, and generally the non-communicable diseases of adulthood, and also has significant benefits for adolescent girls. So there are real returns to the health sector. Social protection, the third of these sectors that's clearly benefiting from these interventions. Social protection, as I said, the most extensive safety net in the world. On average, in low-income countries, each meal provided for a child represents something like 10% of household income over the year, and therefore, and that's per child. So the more children you have, the more substantial the school meals are as a support for children. And of course, we have the new evidence around job creation, and we saw some of that discussed even in some of the analyses that have been presented today. And finally, on this piece, just to make the point that there's also a fourth, thank you. The fourth sector that's important is agriculture in this context. And certainly Harold's right, we need more information to understand that. There is a reason why it is the USDA which runs the school meals program in the US, and that was created during the Depression to create markets for Western farmers. And if we look at the example of Brazil today, all the food in the Brazil program, and Brazil feeds 40 million children every day, all the food is coming from Brazil, and 30% of that food is deliberately targeted to come from family farms. So there's a huge area here of importance in the agricultural sector. So all four of those things together become the key issues in the returns. And if I could have the next slide to say that what we now realize is how important all of those interventions are in terms of climate and planetary health too. And I can go into that in more detail later. But I do want to encourage you in the final slide here, do join our academy. If you're interested in this area, do become part of the Global Academy of the Research Consortium of the School Meals Coalition. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Don, for these very insightful comments. Let me turn the floor to Dr. Lynette Neufeld from FAO, Director in the Food and Nutrition Division there, to give us a sense of how FAO is handling this evidence into action movement. Over to you, Lynette. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person. So just to go through a few details, we've heard about the enormous opportunity that school meals present, the gaps in the evidence, some of the examples of countries. It was great to hear the updates on the recent evidence that was presented. But one of the challenges that we're going to continue to have related to that evidence is the extremely wide diversity of context in which these programs are implemented. And therefore, the opportunity for impact, as we say, the potential for benefit is going to vary across those contexts. The programs themselves, the content of those programs is highly variable, as are the outcome measures. And while that makes sense because we're working in unique contexts, it is going to continue to be a challenge in terms of the consolidation of evidence and sort of going beyond individual contexts into the cross-context comparison, shall we say. One of the things that I didn't hear too much about was some of the complementary activities that we would like to see around a school meals program. For example, the nutrition education, and was mentioned that opportunity to strengthen dietary habits that are so important as a part of those formative years for childhood and adolescence. The critical role of the food environment in and around the schools. We know that children are exposed to perhaps a healthy meal in school, but the moment they leave, they're exposed to an abundance of the marketing and so forth. So that's sort of that whole of the context around the schools. And we do know that some countries have made excellent progress in this regard in looking at that broader context. So it's really important that we keep bringing that in. And with that thinking and in that context, in 2019, FAO published a school food and nutrition framework, recognizing that the opportunity that schools present across these multiple opportunities, these multiple entry points, but also the very complex connected policies and actions that would be needed to go beyond the focus on a meal to the focus on a school food and nutrition intervention, which really, from all that we heard from Dan and others about that critical importance of that period, is where I think we would all like to see if resources were infinite and able to do that. So the four pillars of this framework are promoting a healthy school food environment, an adequate, safe and adequate, the safe and adequate school food itself, the meal, integrated effective food and nutrition education throughout that school system, stimulating inclusive procurement and value chains, local procurement, the homegrown school feeding that we've been hearing about, and then, of course, all of the enabling political, legal, financial, and institutional environment that would support taking that forward. So if we focus for a moment on that first component, what do we mean by that adequate, safe, and adequate school food? FAO has been working to develop and test a methodology to design those nutrition guidelines and standards. Again, every context is going to be unique in what is in the meal, but we should be following some level of standards to say, how do we define what's in that meal? How do we define what is adequate and safe, locally, contextually appropriate meal for children? So the guidelines and standards are based both on the nutrient content of the meal as well as the food group targets, adjusted for age, of course. And then are taken into consideration in terms of what actual foods are included there on local preferences. The methodology is currently being tested in Cambodia with a rigorous impact evaluation running there right now. But this is only one study, so we would like to see other evaluations that build up on that and use those guidance to be able to look at the outcomes across nutrition, schooling, local employment, and some of the other things that we've been hearing about. Of course, obviously always depending on the package of interventions that's being delivered. But moving beyond this testing phase into thinking about integrated approaches, and we heard several speakers talk already about the budgetary constraints that these types of programs are under, we need to be thinking also about the cost implications, the incremental cost benefit as we do these evaluations. So just a real plea that we include cost effectiveness, costing analyses, cost effectiveness analyses embedded within these to be able to make that stronger case. I noticed that the framing is often on a rights-based approach, and one I suppose could argue to say if this is a right, we don't need that because it's based on the right of children to have adequate food. But given that we are always under those resource constraints, having that evidence of cost and cost effectiveness and incremental cost is a really important challenge that we need to step up to. And so in discussing this with some of my colleagues here and Aulo in preparing for this session, we did also want to bring in the work that FAO has been doing on true cost accounting. So true cost accounting provides an interesting opportunity as an approach to uncover the hidden impacts of agri-food systems on environment, people's health and livelihoods and so forth, on the basic premise that you can identify effective levers for reducing those hidden costs. And in the case of school meals, there is a very interesting opportunity to look at this methodology and particularly, for example, use that methodology in criteria that go in perhaps to the public procurement component. So true cost accounting is not my area of expertise, but I'm very happy to let you know that this afternoon, Andrea Cataneo, who works in the agri-food economics division and leads the true cost accounting work at FAO, is going to join you and speak a little bit further about that opportunity. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nanette, for these very insightful comments. Without further ado, let me pass the floor to Kagwira Kome from the Rockefeller Foundation to perhaps explore the implication of this from a perspective of sort of the transition to whole grain foods and the food system perspective. Kagwira, thank you so much for joining. It's late in Nairobi. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. My name is Kagwira Kome, and I work in the Regenerative School Meals Initiative of the Rockefeller Foundation. The speakers have shown the evidence linking school meals to food security, nutrition diversity, and also job creation. And the examples shared show that school meals are just not a lifeline for children worldwide, but they also improve human capital, drive economic development, and also just strengthen resilience in our food system amidst the effect of climate change. Now, let me share with you a bit about what Rockefeller is doing and how we're moving to action from the evidence that has been there over the years. So at the Rockefeller Foundation, our goal is to feed 100 million more children with increasingly regeneratively produced school meals. So to achieve this, we're working on 3 areas. The first one, transforming meals, transforming markets, and then mindsets. So some of our team members call it the 3 M's. So in the first area of meals, the first priority is to work with government so that we can increase the number of school children that are accessing school meals that are nutritious, but also nourish them. And then on the second area is one of the things that we have noticed with the meals, that there are opportunities to shift the school meals towards menu options that are more nutritious and affordable. So a few examples of our work. For those of you who've worked in East Africa, a bit of West Africa, a very popular meal is the maize meal. So we're working with different implementing partners, including WFP and several governments, if we can shift from refined maize to whole grain maize. Currently, we have over 1 million learners who are consuming whole grain maize that is 5 times more nutritious in Kenya, Burundi. And then in Rwanda, we're working towards it being a universal program where 4 million children will actually be having this in their school meal program. Another example that we have is in Burundi, where we have over 200,000 learners who are consuming whole grain parboiled rice. And despite its difference in texture and in color, there's been 80% acceptability amongst the learners. And another advantage is that it's cheaper than refined white rice as it's minimally processed. And for beans, Mr. Mangani will be glad to hear this. We're working in Malawi, Kenya, and Tanzania, where we're working with learners to consume fortified beans for better health outcomes. When we started this work in Kenya, the high iron beans were 30% more expensive, but working closely in the school meals value chain, whereby we worked with the farmers, with the smallholder farmers, the seed companies, and with increased supply, the price has actually equalized with the ordinary beans. And then lastly, on the meals, we're working on shifting to more indigenous crops like millet and sorghum that are more climate resilient. Some of the menus that we have piloted and are expanding now is the consumption of sorghum and beans, so trying to replace meals. So for example, in Kenya, 80% of the meals of the rice that we consume in our school feeding program is imported. When you change that to sorghum and beans, it's 20% cheaper than the rice and beans, and the learners actually love the meal. Now, the second area that we're working in is markets. I think we've heard it from the evidence shared that school meals can actually be a powerful market driver. We are able to influence school meal procurement decisions. For example, in Kenya, we're working on an aggregator model, so connecting aggregators or cooperatives directly to schools and local communities so that the foods can be grown regeneratively. In Benin, we've had a lot of success, whereby when we started working there, about almost 80 to 90% of the food was important. But as of last year, 50% of the commodities in the school feeding program are locally sourced. Another area that we're working on markets in adjacent areas is, as you know, 90% of our school meals are prepared using biomass. But if we were to transition to clean cooking across the continent, we'd be able to avoid almost about 32 million metric tons of greenhouse gases. So we're supporting governments with their transition plans. So for example, Kenya has committed to 100% transition. So we're supporting them in developing different options that would be available to unlock carbon financing, because it's quite an expensive initiative to undertake. And then finally, on the last M is mindsets. And what we're trying to do here is, firstly, with the learners that we work with, is try to influence and create healthy dietary patterns, influence the preferences so that they can choose healthier foods in future. But also, most importantly, is also working with policymakers, supporters, and advocates, such as the School Meals Coalition, just to ensure that school meals remains a priority on the global agenda. As I end, I just want to share that the Rockefeller Foundation, WFP, and several other partners are in the process of designing a facility that will provide technical support to governments and support transition in the commitments for universal school feeding into concrete, actionable strategies. So we're inviting other funders and partners to work with us towards these 3 M's, which are transforming meals, redesigning incentives for markets, and shifting mindsets. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kagwiria. It's really great to see sort of connecting the dots between how we, school meal quality is critical in some ways to really connect the dots between the different benefit streams. And it's one part of how to make school feeding programs become more nutrition sensitive. The other part, of course, is bringing complementary activities like Ninette was saying. So trying to get nutrition education and other things. So the next panelist, Dr. Lilia Bliznashka from the World Bank, I've asked her to reflect a little bit more from the nutrition side, really to try and pull out her experiences in terms of how that is reflected in action and the perspectives from the World Bank. Thank you, Mia. You're good sitting there.
Is it on? Okay, great. I'll sit here next to Mangani. Yeah, so I'm going to reflect a little bit from a nutrition perspective and then a little bit from a social protection perspective as well, as I sit at the nexus of those 2 departments at the World Bank. I lead a trust fund window on integrating food and nutrition security into social protection initiatives there. So the frame of mind is how do we put all of this evidence into action? And sometimes the science is there and the incentives are not, but this time I think the science and the incentive compatibility is all aligned. So we're at a really exciting point in time. From the World Bank perspective, especially within the social protection department, we have a new ambition to get up to 500 million more people covered by social protection. But so far, across the whole World Bank in the past 20 or so years, we've only reached 20 million children with school meals. We've only invested about $200 million, which in the scope of the World Bank is peanuts. And as we're thinking about how to expand and how to get to those 500 million, it's a really tempting area to dip our toe into school meals more. And we also are very responsive to our client demand, and clients are demanding school meals. That's what they care about. And so figuring out how to do that and how to do that well is going to be really important. From a nutrition perspective, it was really exciting to see Lily present results on improved cognition from just a small tweak in the nutritional composition of a school meal program. Oftentimes when we do meta-analyses of school meal programs, we don't really see big movements in dietary diversity and other nutrition outcomes, especially stunting. But we don't often consider what we put into the school meal. So Lynette touched on it already. We need to monitor what we're tracking. We need to make sure that we're following nutritional guidelines. And then even down to the catering level, we need to be able to track what it is that kids are getting on their plate. So luckily we have Franny to combine with the global diet quality score meal and menu metric that can help us really ensure that what's on the plate is nutritious and is adequate. And that's really important, and not to mention food quality, because we could be doing more harm than good if we're putting poor food quality food on the plate. Secondly, from the social protection perspective, targeting is really important. So how are we reaching those kids that are really hard to reach, that maybe are not in school? Do we build in take-home rations? And like Lily pointed to, the impact in conflict settings can really be enormous, because that's where the need is greatest. From a social protection perspective, it can really be an amazing tool to scale up as crises happen and scale down according to need, but preferably scaling up and continuing to scale up. And then the third point I wanted to talk about really reflects on Simone's work. It's really exciting to see some concrete numbers on the jobs perspective. Social protection is safety nets and cash, but we also do a lot of skilling and training of people and trying to create job and demand for jobs and supply of labor. And so with school meals, there is, as many of the panelists have touched on, this really unique and untapped potential to create healthy food systems change and build local value chains that are robust and resilient and sustainable. And as we see sort of a stable demand coming from school meals, we can put more and more of our efforts within the job creation space into upskilling people along the food value chain, not just from production, but all the way down to marketing. So that's really exciting. So yeah, those are the main reflections I have. I think as we at the World Bank think about really diving into school meals, one of the biggest challenges is going to be implementation. As you know, school meals is insanely complex with the procurement and the storage and the firewood, as you mentioned, and the tracking and the financing and et cetera. So we really need an implementation roadmap that's bespoke to the World Bank and to, building off of the work that a lot of our colleagues have already done. I think of it as sort of a 10,000 piece puzzle, and I love doing puzzles, but I love doing them even more with other people. And I really like looking at the picture of where I'm going. So I think we need partnerships, and we need a good, solid coordination roadmap. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mia. So without further ado, let me call on the last panelist, the legendary Arlene Mitchell, who's the Executive Director at Global Child Nutrition Foundation, to really connect the dots between everything we've heard. Can I also ask the presenters, so Lily, Benedetta, and Simone, to take a seat, so we'll then move seamlessly to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Aulo. This has given me a lot of things to think about, and I'll just throw out a bunch of stuff that that's the way my mind works, so bear with me if you can. As Lynette said, context is super important and a complicating factor in school meal programs. The multi-sectoral aspect of school meal programs has come up several times as being a confounding factor. It's also a fabulous aspect of school meal programs. The recurring expense and cost of school meal programs has come up with several of you, and it is a major factor and challenge to school meal programs. I'm going to add a new factor and challenge to school meal programs and the research that we can all do to contribute to the learning and the implementation of school meal programs, which is there's a new skepticism about science and about researchers and about liberal values and intellectualism. And I'm not saying that just because we're sitting in the United States right now. It's happening around the world, and it's something that we have to be extremely concerned about because it affects our work and our credibility. So it's more important than ever that we learn to speak a language that isn't just insider language. It isn't just for the intellectual elite. It isn't just the researcher who understands what we're saying. So with those as kind of background, there are a number of things that occurred to me that we need to spend a bit more time researching in the very practical kind of way I was talking about. We do need to know more about the impact on youth and adolescents in particular, but I think of youth now more about how do we create labor opportunities for youth? How do we make exciting new job opportunities? And I think the school feeding programs around the world could become a major employer of youth. Nigeria showed that early on in their homegrown school feeding approach. They kept track of how many youth they were able to employ just sorting eggs and delivering eggs to schools and learning about fish and transporting fish to school, et cetera. We could be very deliberate in creating jobs for youth, and youth are a major challenge sociologically in the world. We talk a lot about adolescence. We don't do diddly squat about adolescence, and it's time that we get serious about it. I'll just leave it there on that topic. I think dropouts are something we haven't paid enough attention to, and it links to the adolescence. Do we really understand why kids are dropping out of school and the impact of what we do, not just in curriculum and learning and teaching, but also in their nutritional needs, in their psychological needs, et cetera? And how can we reverse what are way too high dropout rates? as I said, my brain bounced all over the place on these in this seminar, and I also come up with, I don't think we understand enough about the political impact of school meal programs. We've heard stories about, presidents running for office saying they're going to start a school meal program, or they're going to improve on the old program or whatever. Are there really political implications that could help us to make sure that children are fed at school? Are there ways to show that to political leaders and make the case to them, not just intellectually, but also in terms of getting votes? I actually think there is something there that we have not delved into. And if we want to make a difference in the world, we want to get kids fed, then understanding the mentality of politicians and helping them to understand how a good program could help them, I think is part and parcel of the equation. And I will end with just the fact that we have right now an extraordinary moment of collaboration, cooperation in the world with the coalition, with various efforts of all of you. Every time we all get together, it's a great friendship gathering. And we have to really solidify that. There is right now a need, an extraordinary need for new levels of trust, understanding, and collaboration. And we can't afford to compete in this arena. We really need to make sure that we are supplementing, adding to, and improving upon one another's work, and not make it about competition and ego, but rather about how we get more children fed in the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Arlene. So that brings the panel discussion to a close. So we're going to move seamlessly to the Q&A. I've been given the privilege of asking you a few questions. I'm going to give Mangani a minute at the end to say that I have the last word, okay? So Mangani, hold. I'm going to ask the first question to Simone, and this is from Dr. Sahar Zagul in Egypt. Very good to have you on the seminar. It's on decentralization of school feeding. So I know you didn't present it today, but I know you've done some great work. Decentralization of school feeding, would it improve the program delivery? And if so, how to start it? I know some of the work you did in Burundi, for example, could give us some ideas.
Does it work? Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for the question. And yeah, indeed, the question around decentralization and trying to move from a centralized procurement model towards the decentralized procurement model is indeed one of the questions that we are trying to address with the impact evaluation window. In particular, I mentioned it before, we recently just concluded a pilot in Burundi where the status quo was this school feeding program that was running on a centralized procurement model where WFP was buying from international or national markets and then distributing it to school. And the country office then wanted to shift towards a more decentralized procurement model where our provincial officials that are conducting procurement within districts. And what we did was to randomly select a number of schools that shift towards this decentralized procurement model. And the question was really trying to understand, okay, what is the impact on service delivery, being the number of school feeding days or the quality of the meals distributed. And we were really agnostic on which way it could go. In the sense, on one side, you can argue that if it's centralized, you have greater control over the distribution towards two schools, as well as the inputs that goes into the meals. On the other side, there was the argument that if you're procuring more locally, then there are less interruptions in the value chain, and you are also potentially stimulating the local economy by procuring locally. So what we did observe from this pilot, that it's very important to remind that it's only one country in a very specific point in time, so a lot of caveats, is that we do observe a statistically significant difference in the number of school feeding days when moving from a centralized procurement model towards a decentralized one. So there is a significantly higher number of school feeding days, and that's due to a reduction in the pipeline interruptions when reaching the schools that are very remote and difficult to reach. However, this comes to a cost in a reduction in the quality of the meals distributed, especially when it comes to fortified food. So it's harder to procure fortified ingredients from local markets. So that was also one of the points that was highlighted in terms of supporting the fortification locally.
Wonderful. Thank you, Simone, for highlighting some of the trade-offs that really become critical. The next question is going to be for Lily on the food environment. So I know it's tricky. So this is from Professor Silva at Wayamba in Sri Lanka. So great to have you on the seminar. So have you looked at the food environment, canteens, or their health and nutrition programs, food literacy and teaching, when you looked at the impact? Thank you.
Thanks for this question, and I'm a big proponent of looking at the food environment when we think about school feeding, because what's on the plate is not the whole story, right? Kids eat at home, they eat on the way to school, around school, and so forth. So we did collect some minimal data on the food environment, but as you saw in some of the photos, like we're talking about Yemen, and there's really not much around these schools. Most of them don't have a canteen. Kids are eating, on the ground. They're storing the biscuits and the milk in what should be classrooms, right? So it's a pretty dire situation to begin with. And in terms of food environment, there's not much going on. So we did consider it with collected information on kind of primarily on healthy foods like sugar-sweetened beverages and fried snacks and things like that, and whether they're available around the schools. They mostly are not available. Kids don't have an allowance to spend, so it's kind of not a big concern there yet, but definitely something to consider as we conduct studies and implement programs in other settings where we know the food environment plays a much bigger role. And I should note in this aspect that most of the schools in our sample are actually in a more rural area, not in an urban setting. So that obviously plays a role as well in the food environment.
Great. Thank you so much, Lily. I've got a question from Dawit Alemayu in Ethiopia. Thanks for your question. It's really around homegrown school feeding and policy in terms of sustainability. Benedetta, I'm wondering, is this something you can answer, or shall we pass that to Mangani?
So I can sort of give a teaser on, we are currently working with Simone, with colleagues from WFP, OAV, TIME, and implementing partners in Malawi to understand how local procurement of food really works, especially how it affects the incomes and the sales of cooperatives procuring the food and the incomes of the farmers who are members of that of those cooperatives, measuring both outcomes at the cooperative level, but also at the farmers level, including food security of households. And so I believe that with evidence that's going to be coming out on Malawi, so stay tuned, we should be able to understand some of these questions about sustainability on that front. And then if I can just say something on costs, Aulo, so in the Gambia, we measured cost of the program. So because many people brought it up, then I thought it may be interesting just for you to hear as well. So similar to what Mangani said, was about, in Malawi, the figure you mentioned was $20 per child per year. So in the Gambia is actually surprisingly very similar. That's why I thought it would be cool to share. It was $14 per child per year. And it's complicated to sort of like do a cost effectiveness analysis to understand cost per impact, because usually cost per impact is common in education interventions where we have one objective, which is increasing learning. But as we've heard also from the panelists, school feeding does much more than that. It does nutrition, it does social protection. And so one important thing that I thought I may just mention before I hand it over to Aulo is from our happy to talk about this more in the future, but one other way of looking at the cost analysis that we did is that with $100 invested in the school feeding program in the Gambia, 2 cases of dropouts were averted, 1 case of food insecurity, 1 case of child depression, and 1 case of child illiteracy. So just to give you an idea that those $100 buy all of these things at the same time. And for this reason, comparisons with education programs that just provide, scholarships or books or something else is a little bit nuanced and complex to do. And of course, we'll talk about this more also later on today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Benedetta. This is really insightful. The next question really is around about innovative ways to finance school meals, particularly at the lower income context. So I'm going to pass that question to both Mia and Arlene. Who of you wants to start? If you want to. It's voluntary.
It looks like I won by default. This has been a challenging question for decades, and I know because I've been around dealing with it for decades. And one of the best presentations I've heard on this topic was at our forum last month in Osaka, Japan, by Betty Kabara of the Rockefeller Foundation. She ran through a list of things which I agree with are options for governments to consider when they're looking at how to finance school feeding programs over a sustained period of time. And it ranges everything from taxes that don't tax the poor to looking at extractive industries and how they can be leveraged. It looks at community participation and parent participation. We had the example from Malawi, and there are examples all over the world. It looks at how we do a much better job at costing and understanding the cost impacts and the cost benefits so that we are making judicious use of the limited resources we have. It looks at leveraging partnerships, something I often think of that is neglected and very hard to do, but I think it's possible, is when you look at the multiple benefits and sectors involved in school meal programs, if you got all of the involved ministries to chip in their fair share for the benefits that they would be buying, then it would be a shared expense across ministries. It wouldn't be entirely a Ministry of Education or a Ministry of Agriculture or whichever is the managing ministry expense. And I think that could make it more palatable. Linking it to labor, right, in ways that we talked about might make it an investment for labor, not just for feeding kids. So those are some things that occur to me and that I remember from Betty's remarks too. But I also think that it's important that I'm going to forget what I was going to say here, just a second. That we protect the budget that does exist for school meal programs. We have found through our global survey of school meal programs and otherwise that if there is a very specific ring-fenced budget item in national budgets, it's much more likely to be a protected ongoing budgetary commitment of the government than if it's annually decided in whatever mode and whatever political environment the budget is considered in. So those are some ideas.
Thank you, Arlene. Mia, 20 seconds.
Well, good thing you covered the bases. I think just a few more additions in terms of where there are existing programs, how to make them a little bit more budget efficient. So if you're talking from the nutrition perspective, I really want to highlight the innovations from the Rockefeller Foundation on switching in budget neutral, nutrition positive ways. So by switching to fortified whole grain from refined grains, you get a huge boost in nutrition at the same cost. And then finding ways of sort of making sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck. In one country that we are financing a pilot for, the government was not following up with local procurers or local caterers, so they were paying the same for each meal regardless of what was served. But if you look at what's actually on the plate, it's very variable. So having monitoring and enforcing mechanisms that make sure that what you're spending actually reaches the children can help you sort of get a lot more value for your money. And then, of course, in sort of a larger macro sense, looking seriously at concessional financing and lending and how World Bank, IDA, and IBRD funds can play a bigger role.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mia. Before I give Mangani the last minute, Kagwiria, you had your hand up. 20 seconds, please.
Okay. Thanks. I just wanted to share a bit more about some of the examples, specifically to Kenya, on how we've been looking at the fiscal space and identifying opportunities for financing. One is the climate financing that's available that I had earlier on mentioned. So that's one of the areas that we are exploring. Sin taxes and sugar taxes, or taxes for ultra-processed foods. That's also something that we are exploring in Kenya. And then we also have, not very popular, but also seeing like what are parent contributions that we can also include so that we can expand the reach for the school meals programs. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kagwiria. Dawn, Lynette, you have 20 seconds each. Anything you'd like to add?
Okay, I would just like to say that it's exciting to see how the evidence base has grown. I want to just point out, working with Simone, I know when we first discussed the things we've heard about today was 4 or 5 years ago. It takes time to get this kind of evidence together. Equally, I want to shout out the GCNF contribution to the data collection. Thank you, Arlene, and how important that has been and how that's pushed the agencies in general, the WFP in particular, to actually start to collect data and present data on school meals and on school health. So I think we're moving forward in a great way. We've never been in a better place, but obviously we've still got a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Lynette?
I think Dawn wrapped that up rather nicely. I agree. We have made enormous progress. I remember the first discussions when I was living in Latin America on school meal programs, and nutrition was not on the agenda. We've come a long way from those discussions. I hesitate to say how many years ago, how many decades ago, but we have a long way to go yet. And working together, it's great to see how many people have joined the Alliance, working together so that we are driving in the same direction and speaking with a common voice on the key priorities, the ways that we need to get there, and reviewing the evidence and thinking about the opportunities to generate that evidence in a way that will allow us to consolidate across context is a really enormous opportunity that we have. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lynette. Mangani.
Thank you very much. I think one thing that I would like to say is that it's more from the Bible. It's a biblical thing. Jesus talked about counting the cost. No one will start building a house and without knowing how much it is going to cost. Otherwise, you stop midway and people will laugh and say, they started, but they were not able to finish. So we need to understand the actual cost. In Malawi, we're looking at about 6 million children that we need to feed. And if it's $20, we do the maths, that will be about 12 billion, 12 million or 120 million, $120 million maybe that we need to do that. And there are several possibilities that could be done. Probably you might, now it's not there yet, but reflections for worldwide, maybe they talked about sugar, but probably fuel might be part of it. It would be a small amount because of the movement. There's a lot that gets bought, and over time that would be a lot, but may not be popular with the government sometimes because nobody wants to do that. And I'm not even sure whether our government, even in Malawi, would be. I would talk, however, in terms of what we were thinking when we met with Mary's Meals and we looked at their model of feeding. It's small monies that come from children, from parents, from well-wishers that gets to feed. And in December, we met as a coalition, WFP, Save the Children, UNICEF, there was also different players to European Union to say, let's reflect and say, can we have a movement that says we have to feed our children? And that will come from the parents themselves contributing a little bit towards that. When we figured out, when we did some research with Aulo, we were literally measuring the amount of flour, and that was being done in my house with my wife, looking at how it was 75 grams per feeding of flour, and that translated into a little less than 25 kgs of flour in a year. And when you show this to people, to a household, it's not too much. Sometimes for a garden that a child can have, sometimes in Malawi we say you should have your small garden. You might find that a child can literally produce that amount from their small garden and feel like they are contributing. There's soy, there's maize flour that can come from that. But that is going to bring in, if you start bringing in the produce as a contribution, then warehousing comes into play. Then processing comes into play. And then you start seeing that school meals become a catalyst from local industrialization, because that processing, school meals does the processing from far, it has to be transported. Now you need to have processors that are from the local environment. You start looking at a movement that has people who get badges for contributing towards school feeding. I'm a school feeding champion. And each time they give a contribution, 40,000 kwacha, which is $20, is something that people can contribute sometimes on a monthly basis. And over the year, somebody would have fed 12, maybe 24, maybe 48 children, depending on what they are able to give. But we need to make it a movement where everybody understands the impact and therefore they will contribute to it. But there are all the other options. In Malawi, there is also the homegrown school feeding model. And I think that we need to reflect on levels. You might start with porridge that is for the lower grades, which is easier to provide, and probably the other meals for the higher grades that will make the differentiation. Because of the amount of work that it takes, having for the whole school for everyone might not be that easy, but probably the differentiation might come in. But key to it is count the cost and move forward. Maybe we start with what is the easiest to do. Maybe you start with porridge, and once the logistics are properly done, you can then look to move. If we really want, we can do it. It can be done. It requires the commitment to have it done. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mangani, and thanks for not mentioning the fried caterpillars you made me taste when we were in the kitchen together. But that could be an addition to the school meal too. And in terms of movement, just to wrap everything up, this is really step one in a set of activities we'll be doing together with the research consortium today and the rest of the week with GCNF. So watch this space. Next Tuesday, we're going to have the launch of the global survey report. So we really look forward to seeing you. One of the key things we're going to deliver as a partnership with the research consortium is work on updating the cost benchmarks. We've seen how important this is from Mangani and from the rest of the speakers. We'll be working over the next year to try and bring better data so that we can help and make better investment choices. And this will be a collaborative effort by a lot of the partners who are sitting here. So let me take this last second to thank you all for joining online and joining in person, and look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you. And there's lunch outside.